Now, I guess we can start with the discussion. You got my email. This is something I'm still a little unclear about. So I don't know if you're going to pull up. You could pull up, I guess, both.
Yep, I'm going to pull them up right now.
Yeah, the evidence map and the evidence table, perhaps.
So I'm going to start here, and I have a question for you. So it looks like you have a lot of systematic reviews, and there seems to be some overlap. So you have multiple systematic reviews that cover the same key question.
Correct.
So have you done any work yet to determine which systematic review might be the best or the most comprehensive?
Right. So that's the immediate next step.
Right.
So the step before this was for everybody to kind of look through a bunch of them and determine which key questions they were relevant for. And then based on that information, the next step would be to have the same individual kind of look at, or maybe two, look at the systematic reviews that address the same key question and determine which ones to use. Now, that was a question I had asked Ethan in the past. I don't know that there's a good answer to this, but is there a way to compare, like, we have ways to assess the quality of randomized trials, but is there a way to assess the quality of systematic review? So perhaps that can help us to determine which one is the best that we should use. Or how do you go about that?
Yeah, so there are a couple things. I have one checklist that I'm going to talk about, which I could bring up now. But mostly the main things to look for are you want the most recent one and the most comprehensive. So generally like the largest number of studies. Another thing to think about is how closely the questions being answered in the systematic review or the questions being addressed map to the questions you guys are asking. Because they're probably not going to be the exact same questions. But as far as quality goes, there's this thing called the AmStar checklist, and this Ethan recommended to me because I was asking him as well, because I've never really done quality assessment of a systematic review. But this is basically a checklist. It's sort of like the Cochrane checklist, but it's for reviews. And you just go through this checklist and essentially answer these questions, and looking at the criteria, rate the study, rate the review for that criteria. So, like, does it have a clearly focused PICO question? Are there at least two people extracting the data? Things like that. One thing I would caution against is this has sort of a scoring. So we're rating it ABC, and eventually it'll ask you at the bottom to calculate a sum. I personally really disagree with quality assessments that map to a score, because everything is so subjective.
Again, I'm sorry, Kev, do you mind repeating what you disagree with?
I don't agree with quality assessments that map to a score. So this is saying that we're essentially rating each item from 1 to 4 and then adding up all of those ratings.
I see.
So I would use this tool as a checklist, maybe something that can indicate a red flag for you, and you can sort of assess the reviews holistically, but I wouldn't recommend actually calculating these scores and just ranking them based on score, because everything is so subjective.
Okay.
Another issue is
how
that...
many...
Sorry.
I can see 3 items. Is there more to this?
I think there are 11 items. Yep.
11. Got it. Okay.
Yep. Another problem with this checklist, which is a big part of why I don't like the fact that it maps to a score, is that a lot of these items are just sort of checking off whether or not something's there and not necessarily assessing the quality of what's reported. So, like, was a list of studies provided, or were the characteristics provided? What's more important is that they were provided and they map to your specific key questions. So a review might get a really high quality score based on this tool, But if it's not actually relevant to your specific key question, then it shouldn't be the one that you're choosing. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yep. So I will send this out. I think this is a good tool just to get a sense of which review, like along with most recent and largest, which review sort of does the best in terms of reporting and covers everything that you need it to cover to get what you need out of it.
Okay. All right. So then I guess thank you so much for bringing this up. So I guess the next step then I will ask we will assign different systematic reviews that are on the same question to different individuals, maybe to two people their key question, and then I'll ask them to use this independently and determine which one is the best. So you don't have to really use all the systematic reviews. You can just use one, correct?
Yeah, one or two, depending on maybe they'll cover different subgroups that you're interested in or something like that. But I certainly wouldn't use all of them that you have in this list. That's a lot.
So let's assume, which probably would be the case for some of these key questions, that the latest systematic review on the topic is like 5 years old. So then, do we have to look at the last 5 years or whenever the systematic review stopped its literature search, and then to see what else is out there, and then do we redo the systematic review, adding the new information, there's new trials, randomized trials, or?
That's definitely what I would recommend, is doing an updated search, maybe adding in some terms that you think should have been in their search, because ideally these systematic reviews will report their exact search strategy. So if you see that there are things they're missing, or things that you can tweak their search to make it map more closely to your key question, then yeah, you should definitely run an updated search and then extract data from those specific trials as well.
I mean, we have a search, right? We have a number of randomized controlled trials in the evidence map.
Right.
So, and of course, since we did this, there's probably some newer ones too that we can look for. But so we can just look at those and determine again which do go through the same process, right? So look at randomized trials, see what key questions each of them answers, and then for the ones that are relevant to each key question, start extracting data from them.
Yep, exactly.
Correct?
Yep.
Well, how do you combine? Okay, so I have a good understanding, I think, at this point, how to extract data using your extraction tables.
Mm-hmm.
I think the rest of the group doesn't, and that's what would be nice to go over with. But how do you combine? Let's say you have 4 new randomized trials from the last systematic review, and that one includes another 5. How do you combine all that?
So as long as the studies from your updated search, so these 5 new ones, would have been accepted under that systematic review's inclusion criteria, then what I would recommend is going back to those original studies, like that the systematic review is citing, and re-extracting some data from those and then doing another meta-analysis. If there wasn't a meta-analysis or you're not interested in a meta-analysis, then you can just extract data from those new ones, whether or not they're exactly the same key question, and qualitatively summarize them in your summary tables.
Okay. Very good. Daniel, do you have any questions so far?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you're actually gonna grade it for each individual question. So you said you're gonna grade the paper, but you got to keep it in mind. But you're gonna actually have to regrade it for each one. So if you're using the same paper for multiple ones, then there should be multiple grades. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Good question.
So this one looks like it works for both key question 1 and key question 2A. So yeah, this should be looked at by people who are just concerned with key question 1 and also by people who are concerned with key question 2. Because it might not be the best for key question 1, but it would be for 2, for example.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So Valerie, what else should we go over today?
So I put together a draft of an extraction form for systematic reviews. Although, give me one sec because the WebEx thing is in my way to click that tab. Or actually, let me do this.
Okay, so you can also extract systematic reviews.
Yep, it'll be a little bit different from the extraction form you guys put together. And just let me know what's missing from here. There might be subgroups or something, but basically the general idea would be the same information we have from the evidence map, which key question you're extracting for, because again, we might have a systematic review that is the best for 2 key questions, so it would have to be extracted for each of those. If you care about, then basically description. So do you care about the average age over the patients? I don't know if you do or not, but something, or just classifications like adult or pediatric could go here. Any population descriptors that are of interest, like a specific condition or a specific subgroup. The number of studies included in that review, the total number of patients, what comparisons being made, and then the way I would imagine it is you have one row that's basically got all of that information. That's then going to be repeated, and we're going to have multiple rows for each review, and there's a new row for every outcome. And then a lot of times a systematic review will include 20-something studies, but only 5 of those studies evaluated a given outcome. So we want the number of studies for that specific outcome that we're extracting. And then if they did a meta-analysis, there might be a quantitative result, like a hazard ratio or an odds ratio, that would go here. And then whatever their overall conclusion is about that outcome. So the efficacy, the safety, whatever your key question is addressing. And then any notes, maybe an overall conclusion for the whole study, something like that, or whatever you think might be relevant.
And what do we insert the assessment from the checklist that you mentioned earlier?
So that could go here. We could put that at the end. But if we only have one systematic review for each key question, I'm not sure we need a formal quality analysis.
Sure. So if we have, like, let's say, 4 systematic reviews that address 3 similar key questions, then we'll list each of them in one of these lines, and then we'll pick one of them to use, the most relevant, or you're going to combine somehow the results of them?
I think the only way we might want to extract more than one is if they deal with different subgroups or slightly different questions. I don't think we need to extract more than one per key question. Although you had a good point. So I think it might be a good idea to have a quality tab here. And this would be not the quality of the systematic review, but their quality assessment of included studies.
Okay.
And if they don't have a quality assessment of included studies, it's a red flag that it's probably not a well done review.
Where do you put the heterogeneity that they report?
Yep. So
Is that something we need to add here too?
we could put it here. I guess if there's systematic reviews,
Because that's
that
part
might
of the
make
quality,
sense.
isn't it? Of the quality of the included studies or not? Or the quality of the meta-analysis, based on what data exists?
Yeah, I think it might be good to put here actually. If they do a meta-analysis, they're going to have some sort of assessment of heterogeneity, which might map to, when you put together the evidence profile, this consistency column. So whether or not the studies were consistent with each other and found similar results. So this extraction form is eventually going to map to an evidence profile, where we have the quality of the evidence, we have a description of the findings, how important is that outcome, things like that. But this is a later step. I just wanted to show it. But that's a good point. So we'll add heterogeneity here.
Okay. Who just joined? Hey, it's William Hope. Hey, Will, how you doing, sir? Thanks for calling.
Good, how are you? Not late.
Well, just to get you up quickly, as you know, where we stand with this guideline is several of us have been assigned some systematic reviews to look at them and determine what key questions they answer, right? Yeah. And we have that information collected. And the next step will be, now that we know which systematic reviews address which questions, we will assign each of us some of those systematic reviews that address the same question, and then you're going to extract, that's what Valerie was just showing on the screen, I don't know if you have it in front of you. You're going to extract some data from those systematic reviews, and you're going to use the appendix that she's showing. It's a checklist that kind of assesses the quality of the systematic review, because our goal is to find out which one is the best one and the most recent one to use for our purposes. Okay.
And then we'll extract, ideally, the best one. Sometimes if you're missing a subgroup or something, we might be extracting 2 systematic reviews.
Right. So let's say, Valerie, we do this and we determine that systematic review X is the one that we really like the best, or is the best one. Now we can directly start writing recommendations on that key question based on the results of the systematic review. Am I correct?
Yep.
Or do we need another step?
As long as it's recent enough and you feel confident that there's not a lot of new literature that you should be searching for, then yes.
Okay. So to that point, we'll again, so once we determine the systematic review, which is the best and the most recent, then we also need to make sure there's not any additional evidence that has been published since that we have to consider, because that may necessitate a new systematic review. The question to Valerie is, Valerie, will we only consider randomized trials or other studies too that have been published since the systematic review?
Generally, we consider all types of study design, unless there's something about your question that would indicate it has to be either randomized or comparative or something like that. But again, if you get like a lot of potentially relevant studies after screening and going through full text screening and everything, you could start to limit to RCTs and the largest RCTs just to save yourself time and resources.
Yeah, I think for this particular topic and guideline, there's a number of RCTs, as you see in the evidence map.
Right.
I think we pulled close to 300 or something. So for most of the things we need, not for everything, but for most, we have plenty of RCTs. At that point, we mainly consider those, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Unless,
I think you're going to run into problems in the special populations, really.
Yes.
That's
right,
so we'll run into need for more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was just going to say a reason why.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. A reason why you might go. I'll make one quick point. So a reason why you might want to include more observational studies or longer term follow-ups is for subgroups that you're not going to find them in RCTs. So you might want to consider case controls, things like that. And also, if you have any safety outcomes, those are generally going to show up more in long-term observational studies as opposed to RCTs.
Right. We'll go.
Okay, so that was what I was asking. I mean, after this is done, if you have a good meta-analysis with a bunch of RCTs, and then you have just a retrospective study, you can just look at that and throw it out. I mean, are we going to go through all the studies that are published and kind of, is that another process?
So ideally that should have been marked in the screening phase. I'm not sure. These are all RCTs here, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, as we're doing this right now, there's studies being published today and tomorrow about these topics. They're not great studies, they're not RCTs, but they're being published.
Right, so
So Valerie, I'm sorry, if I may make a comment here. So our approach so far has been that if we have the answer to the key question by a systematic review, then we don't really look, let's say, which is very recent, we don't really look at the rest of the evidence. If we don't have the answer, obviously we keep looking until we find the answer. Is that appropriate or not, or inappropriate?
I think that's appropriate.
Okay. So we have, in this evidence map, we haven't listed, we also obviously have the observational studies. We haven't listed them because we had so many randomized trials, so we thought it would give us probably the answer to most questions. But we still have, I think, Ethan has also probably the observational studies categorized. I don't think he included them in this particular evidence map. We might have to look at some of them once we get to that point.
Yeah, but that will be entirely dependent on what you find in the systematic reviews and the RCTs, whether you need to go that far.
Yep. What else would you like to tell us about it?
So we could look quickly at the evidence profile, just so you can get a sense of where we're going with this.
Yes.
So this is the type of thing that will go like into the actual document. A lot of the other, like the evidence map and probably even the extraction tables, are going to be appendices. This is a way more succinct version of all of those. Everything's condensed, and it can follow along. After each guideline, you can have a table like this. So we generally have the number of studies included. So these can be organized by outcome, they can be organized by population, by key question, however you want to categorize these. And then, again, the rows also could be either outcomes or populations or things like that. So for this example, we were looking at registry studies and predictors of graft loss in kidney transplant recipients. So we had graft loss was the outcome, so this whole table is looking at graft loss. And then each of these rows was a specific predictor that a registry looked at. So we had the number of studies that addressed this question. This was just, we wanted to show some characteristic about these studies. So the percentage of patients in these studies that had this actual predictor. So it was generally people with the predictor versus people without. So we wanted to give those proportions. This could be anything you think might be relevant to the question. Then the quality of the studies. So this will be the quality of, if you're doing a systematic review here, it will be the quality of the studies included in that review, not necessarily the quality of the review itself. Consistency across studies. This is related to heterogeneity. It's basically, do the studies agree with each other? Do they all point in the same direction? Do they all come to the same general conclusion? So you might have a non-significant result and a highly significant result, but as long as the hazard ratio is in the same direction, they're probably consistent with each other. The hazard ratios on the other side of 1, for example, they're probably inconsistent, and that will dock your overall quality of evidence. Same thing, if there are major limitations in these studies, that will then reduce the overall quality of the evidence. Directness of the evidence has to do with the outcome specifically, so is it an intermediate outcome or is it the actual endpoint you're looking for as opposed to a surrogate? And then other considerations. So sparse is the most common one we have here. Generally, it's just there weren't a lot of studies that looked at this question, so that's sparse evidence. Then we rate the quality of evidence. So at least using the grade framework, we start with high, and then for each -1, -2, we dock it a category. So high, moderate, low, very low are our categories here. Then we have just a very qualitative description of the findings. So across these studies, what do we see? Maybe even if we want to get granular within these studies, what are the hazard ratios? What are their actual conclusions? And then the importance of that specific outcome. So again, we want critically important or somewhat important. If it's not an important outcome, it shouldn't even be included in anything. And then down here, so this one's not complete, but then the overall quality of evidence across all of these rows, across all predictors in this example, overall, what can we say about predictors and graft loss, and then an overall summary of the studies here. So what did studies actually look at, and what did they find? Does that all make sense?
In this table, Valerie, you generate based on the data extraction we do for the randomized trials, yes or no?
Yep, and the systematic reviews if we have them.
Okay. So let's say a systematic review includes 5 studies, five randomized trials that assess the outcome of interest, and there's 2 more randomized trials since that assess the same outcome. And the 5 of the systematic review all are consistent, and 1 randomized trial is also consistent, and 1 is inconsistent, so it argues the opposite. What do you do with this? Do you count the systematic review as 1 or as 5? How you do reconcile this?
So I would count that the randomized controlled trial as 1 out of 7 is not consistent with the others. Those are generally consistent results then, but these are, like, you'll understand, these are very subjective categories. So you could say that a significant result versus a non-significant result are inconsistent with each other, but you have to consider the directionality, you have to consider the size, like the actual effect size. So it's going to be a little subjective. In a case like that, I would probably say they're consistent just because there's 1 out of 7 that's not. If it was closer to 4 and 3, that would be inconsistent. So I can't say that there's a hard line for a percentage. It's a judgment call. But I would say the number of studies there are the number of studies in the systematic review plus the individual RCTs that you find afterwards.
Sure. Does Danielle or Will have any questions so far?
No. I mean, you kind of answered it. So a lot of these things on this table are subjective based on the person who's reviewing this study.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we usually have a double check. Somebody will fill it out and somebody else will go back through and just make sure it all makes sense.
Okay.
What else?
Those were the big things I wanted to hit on. We have that webinar from Ethan about RCT data extraction. Are there any questions on that or anything you want me to go over again? Or was that video sufficient to catch you guys up and refresh?
My suspicion, Valerie, is that we will have probably questions on that, and we will need some guidance once we start doing it, because I don't think besides me, anybody else in the group has done it.
Okay.
And really the questions start coming up when you start doing it, because that's what happened to me, and I was always in touch with it and trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. But I suspect everybody else will have the same, even though we have the instruction. I still think we'll be a little, we'll need some help.
Okay.
But just to recap, and then I think we can set another conference call to do this. But to recap, so the next step for this will be, we will ask our participating members, will assign specific key questions to them as systematic reviews, and they need to pick, using the extraction document you showed, they need to extract some of the systematic review data, and they need to pick which one is the best to answer the question.
Yep.
And then the other task they will have to do is to see when it was published and if there's additional evidence, i.e. randomized controlled trials that have been published since, and which ones are they, right?
Yep.
And then perhaps, as an immediate next step, is proceed with the extraction of data from those randomized trials using the other extraction table that we have.
Right, that's correct.
Correct?
Yep.
So at that point, I think, if we're able to do this, then at that point, we probably will be ready to have another call for additional guidance and questions. What does Will and Danielle think? Does that make sense to you guys, and do you think it's feasible, or is it not clear? Because that's important to know.
I think you're right earlier where once we start doing it, I'll probably have some questions because some of this is new. But I think we should probably put out the assignment, start working on it, and then maybe have another conference call to sort of ask questions and get advice.
Okay, Danielle, what do you think? It looks like you're talking, but we cannot hear you. Are you talking?
I don't hear it.
We still don't.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go.
Now we can.
Oh, okay. Sorry, the mute button is. Anyway, I agree. Until we do it, it's pretty. I mean, it seems very straightforward. It's only when you're actually doing it you'll start running into questions.
Right. But the plan that I outlined doesn't make sense to both of you. Is it straightforward or not?
Yeah,
If it doesn't make sense to you, what makes sense to the others who are not on the call, and then we'll be back to square one.
No, I think it makes sense. But set deadlines. Say.
Yes. Well, yes.
I work better with deadlines.
Sure. All right. So then we'll distribute to people, break this down, and then we'll set a deadline. What do you think the deadline should be? Should we give this a month? Too long?
I would give it a month or so, and then if people are still not done,
maybe schedule a call a month from now again with Valerie.
Yeah.
And then at that point we should have things ready at least to answer all the questions that we have. And then we might be actually fairly close to, depending on how many key questions we have fully answered or we have good evidence to answer, we might be fairly close to get into what we need to with this. Or we might need to focus on one or two key questions that there's not much evidence about.
Agreed.
Does that sound fair?
Sounds perfect.
Valerie, any thoughts?
It sounds good to me.
So you'll make this session available electronically so the others can listen to it as well, correct?